Check 2, 3, can you hear me? If you think about raw ingredients, what do you really need to make a world-class department?
I think the only person who's served longer than you guys is now Vladimir Putin.
What makes a great fellowship? Question I'm often asked, and I have 5 things.
The thing is, I happen to be the luckiest guy alive because every time I go, they go, "Sir, you've been randomly selected to undergo advanced processing." And I go, "What are the odds, man? What are the odds?" If you had to choose a mentor, Mr Miyagi or Yoda? Fire in the booth, I freestyle the truth. This will be interesting because it's the first time I've done one without Pete Bates.
Are you missing him?
I feel slightly naked, actually.
Okay.
I feel slightly naked.
You can imagine how I feel. I am Pete Bates, but brown.
Well, the only nice thing is that Pete normally sits right next to me. You know.
What, on your lap?
Legs against my thigh, and it's slightly awkward.
Oh.
Thanks
for sharing.
Yeah, no, I might cut that out. It's a real pleasure today. I'm joined by a dear colleague and someone who's been a mentor to me, Mr Prim Achan. Prim is like a father to me.
Really? But similar age?
Similar-ish. There's a little
One of
difference.
those fathers?
There's a little difference.
Okay.
Show me on
my Jesuit school upbringing.
Show me on the doll. And so my whole career and my job here, I'm very grateful to Prim. Prim was the guy who I first met in 2012 and helped get me set up for this job, helped get the ball rolling for the MSc program that I run now with Pete Bates in Orthopaedic Trauma Science.
You're welcome, everybody around the world.
Everyone's cursing you right now again. If it wasn't for you, you've inflicted this guy upon us. And I came and spoke to you, and here we are now, what, 8 years later.
Wow, time flies.
Do you regret it now?
No, come on, Cash. Well, thanks for asking me. I feel a slight imposter syndrome, replacing Master Bates at one of these things. We've agreed not to talk much about trauma, but no, I think, well, firstly, Cash, you've done a great job on so many fronts since you started, so no regrets whatsoever. Apart from that award you won this year, which...
Oh, for being the funniest person in the department?
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping we weren't going to talk about that. I came second again. Third year on the trot.
Always a bridesmaid, never the bride.
Yeah. Do you think that's unfair? I've even asked if there could be an award for assists. I think I set a lot of people up.
Yeah, you do. That's the thing, you set them up, I knock them down.
Yeah.
Prim is a senior colleague of ours here in the department. He is a hip and knee surgeon, practice which is with primary revision arthroplasty and sports. Prim is the training program director for the Percivall Pott rotation. How long have you been to PPD now?
10th year.
10th year.
Which I think, apart from Tim Briggs and Farris, makes me the oldest TPD in the country.
Maybe not the oldest, but certainly the longest serving.
Yeah.
Let's clarify that.
Right, yeah.
No, I think the only person who's served longer than you guys is now Vladimir Putin.
And he's trying to extend term. Yeah.
He is, yeah. So there's a precedent.
He's given me some ideas.
And also, it was interesting. We talked earlier. We just had a consultant meeting. We were talking about teaching and how the department has grown from 12 to 50. And whilst we're here, I think it's only fair you get the credit because you were instrumental as the driver for that change in the expansion of the department.
Well, I played my part. I think I was clinical director, and so I led it. What really helped is, from the first appointments I made, everyone has worked towards a collective goal. I think everyone shared the vision, and that made it a lot easier to achieve.
But let's be fair, you had the vision. It was your vision.
And this is maybe something that will come up in our conversation. I built a vision over the experiences I had, the good times in training, the places I visited, that I thought, what have they got? Why are they buzzing? Why can't we be buzzing? And I've always thought one of the reasons I chose to come to Whitechapel was, if you think about raw ingredients, what do you really need to make a world-class department? All shining, all beating. And the first thing is you need loads of patients. And you need the most complex patients that are out there. And man, that first time I came out of Whitechapel Tube Station, it is a shock to the system
It was
in
for me,
every
yeah.
way, every sense stimulated at once. But in terms of patient pathology, it's not just on the trauma front. On every side, if you look at the history of immigrants into the East End of London, we see all sorts of infection, all sorts of post-torture, post-war injuries. We still see huge deprivation. And so that patient cohort was there. And then on top of that, if you could add medical school, great training programs with pedigree, finance, which London has a lot of, and then the right team, I think for me it had all the ingredients to be great. And the opportunity I think I had was, one, kind of plotting that vision, but then having a part in choosing that team. Didn't always get it right, Cash, as you know.
Yeah.
But we've put together, I enjoyed time with all of my colleagues that I've appointed or played a part in appointing, and the guys who've taken over me have continued in that tradition. So
What's interesting, just as an aside, is that you talk about patients. When I joined, the trust had merged with various other. So the Barts Health NHS Trust was created when I joined. So there's a lot of mergers going on before my time. But when I arrived, the catchment area was 2.5 million,
right,
of which we're the tertiary hospital. And
no, so that's our DGH population.
Yeah.
And our tertiary population extends much further. If you think about the trauma network or the complex arthroplasty or peds or spine, or limb recon, I could keep going. The fact is 2.5 million puts our population of our catchment area ahead of the second largest city in the UK. So the Greater Manchester population, 2.4. And that's phenomenal. It kind of gives you a scale, and that's what was one of the big levers in getting that expansion, because actually, even looking back at the Centre for Workforce Intelligence data, looking at 2013, we should have had 66 consultants in 2013, looking to expand by 2020 to 150. So even though we've gone from 12 to 50, we're still hugely under-resourced for our population. Tim Briggs, if you're listening.
I'm not sure Briggsy is listening.
He should know.
Yeah, well, hopefully so. But I hope he doesn't listen to the end of the first one, because otherwise, you might not see me again. We're going to talk today about choosing a fellowship. The reason I really wanted you to do this is from a couple of reasons. One is because you're an established training program director. You're on the SAC. Training is very much what you do, and you've also been involved in a lot of consultant appointments. And so I've come onto the panel over the last few years, but the fact is you have a much greater breadth of experience of what people are looking for from a candidate coming to a consultant job, and fellowship is a very key part of that. And increasingly so, people are looking at... There was a time where people were being appointed before they'd gone on fellowship, or were early in their fellowship. So now we're seeing people who've come back and maybe gone into locum posts. And the third reason I wanted you was because you always speak very well when it comes to mentoring and advising people, because you have done for me. And what was always considered a good fellowship has changed over the years, I think it's fair to say.
I think it's always changing. I mean, fellowship, what is it all about? So when I trained, I was one of the last generation where you did your fellowship time within your 6 years of training. As training got more refined, programs, Kalman came in, training programs were much more coordinated. Exposure to everything that you needed as orthopedics grew in all its subspecialty areas meant that 6 years was probably enough. 3,000 cases were kind of ballpark of what people were doing. How much of that was supervised is unclear. And as structure came into it, people found that, 1,800 became the target number of cases to do. Was this done under proper supervision? Were you getting work-based assessments? And the fellowship, almost as a consequence of that focus on training in your time, meant that it had to be post-completion of training. So post originally CCST, now CCT. And the question obviously, at that stage was, do I need to do a fellowship? God, look at Mr. So-and-so here. He never went on fellowship. He was the golden boy and went straight into a consultant job.
And there were some people who did that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think now everything has become so much more competitive, so much more structured, that I think it's pretty rare that nobody does a fellowship. And in complex areas like spine, it's almost impossible to sit as a Royal College rep on a panel and appoint someone who hasn't done a fellowship. And there is the reverse, which is if they then run into difficulty, people are looking at who's sat on the appointment panel and checked their worthiness in terms of training and ability to perform. So it's very much a remit of any appointment panel now, an AAC that's sitting to appoint a consultant to see what their training involves. So I tell all my trainees, you've got to do a fellowship. The question then becomes where? Now, there are personal circumstances that mean some people can't leave the country. You know, it could be family, it could be situations. And I have to be understanding, however glamorous it looks and how much fun it might look to be on Bondi Beach over our winter, some people just can't go abroad.
And that was the situation I had. So my wife had a partnership as a GP.
She had a partnership?
Partnership.
Okay.
She had just been on maternity, just had a baby on maternity leave. And so that kind of limited me. I couldn't then go overseas for a year for a variety of reasons and family reasons. And so, you know, I ended up doing a fellowship close to home. I did a year at Oxford, don't you know?
Actually,
yeah. And then
they still speak highly of you. they're probably listening.
Yes, and I had a great time.
I will.
Yeah. Will, Andy, Jacko, just Jacko. So I had a good time. I had a great time at Oxford, and then I was fortunate enough to get a Winston Churchill fellowship. So I got to spend 4 months in the States, and I got to do a lot of stuff overseas. And see, I wasn't operating, but I was involved, and I got to see lots of different practice, which is something you've experienced in the States as well.
Yeah. So
just tell us about your fellowship.
So, like I said, I did them in between. I wasn't as organised as I like to portray now. I was pretty disorganised, and both my fellowships were organised for me by mentors and senior consultants. So the first one was in New York. I went to the Hospital for Joint Disease and NYU. They just merged to do trauma at Bellevue with Nirmal Tijwani, who's a former Pott trainee, but also Ken Eagle, who's there, and Ken Koval, who just left the department. So shout out to the boys at Joint Disease.
Keep it real.
Keep it real. So Bellevue is the major public level 1 trauma centre in New York, and it was absolute carnage, I have to say.
Even compared to the London?
Yeah, in that people with money and insurance went to the glamorous places, and this really were the proper polytrauma. So yeah. I guess similar in a way to Whitechapel, but everyone.
But more shootings, I guess. More
shootings. They had one ward at Bellevue that was called the Rock. And even though you went through a security, like an airline security to get into the hospital, when you got to the Rock, there was a proper kind of check-in area for guns, and you had another pat down as you went to see the patients. And they were all dressed like Nicolas Cage, not in The Rock, which is the movie where Con Air, where they're all in orange suits. And they're all like that, chained to the bed. Yeah. So yeah, they were. It was proper trauma.
It's funny because I'm just when I went to the States, I spent about a month at Parkland, Dallas, with Adam Starr, who Pete did his fellowship with. And
I can tell you an Adam Starr story.
Tell me in a second. So I was going around with Adam, and we saw shooting after shooting after shooting. We saw like 5 shootings. I said...
And that was just Adam.
And I said, Adam, I go, maybe it's a Dr. Starr. I don't think we were on first name terms at that point. But I said, do you realise if you didn't have guns, you wouldn't have all these problems? And sent that to a Texan in Texas. He looked at me with absolutely goes, have you ever shot a gun? And I said, no. And he said, right. And we went, genuinely, swear... I've got photos in our scrubs, in his car, straight to Ray's famous guns, and went to a shooting range and I shot my first ever guns in scrubs.
Okay. And
then basically went back and then went to theatre.
And how was it when you went to airport security when they did the little swab testing? Were you crapping yourself?
I do the best of times.
Mr. Achan, if you'd like to step
So the
aside.
funny thing is, I happen to be the luckiest guy alive because every time I go, they go, "Sir, you've been randomly selected to undergo advanced processing." And I go, "What are the odds, man? What are the odds?"
The chances of that.
The chances of that. So luckily this time they didn't. But yes, that could have been messy. And when we got back, just changed our shoes and went into theatre.
Nice. Anyway, so back to my fellowship. Just quick.
I'm going to tell us an Adam story.
Oh, the Adam story. No, so Adam Starr was invited by the Percivall Pott Club. So he was part of the Dallas trainees who came to the Norfolk and Norwich. Buchholz, who was their program director, arranged for 4 of the 5 chief residents
to come. Norwich as in Anglia?
Yeah, East Anglia.
East Anglia, right.
Norwich.
Okay.
What do you mean? What other Norwich?
Norwich. From Dallas to Norwich?
Yeah. So they used to come.
Okay.
Anyway, they used to come and spend their time there, and so the consultants there, John Albert at the time, had invited Adam Starr to talk to the Pott Club. And he came, and those guys had very kindly organised accommodation for Adam at the Royal College of Surgeons, and the Pott dinner was on Friday night, and they came up and introduced me to Adam Starr and said, "Oh, Prim, do you mind keeping an eye on him? He's staying, his flight back's not till Sunday." And I said, "Are you here on your own?" And Adam said, "Yeah." I said, "Isn't it Thanksgiving weekend?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Wow." And nobody at the Pott Club had kind of recognised what Thanksgiving was.
Yeah.
And he'd left his family to come to talk to us. And
That's a huge commitment.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I said to him, "Man, you can't stay at the Royal College of Surgeons. Come and stay at our place." So, Sarah, my ever-suffering, long-suffering wife, is so brilliant.
The Percivall Achan.
Yeah. So we not only do we invite her over, on the Saturday, we've got an American friend, aptly named Chuck Parker. And Chuck hosts this big Thanksgiving thing, right, that we're going to. So I phone Chuck up and say, "I've got this guy, Adam Starr, he's staying with me. I've got to bring him along, or I'm going to stay at home with him." He says, "No, bring him along." So we take Adam Starr along to Chuck's, and, there's 20-odd people there, and they, everyone, the girls are all cooking. It's kind of old stereotypes. We don't do that anymore, but the Americans,
Yeah.
Anyway.
And there's guns everywhere.
There's guns. No, so these guys, the boys all go to the local park and play touch football.
Right.
And Adam Starr is the quarterback.
Yeah.
Of course, he gets his genes totally trashed because he's tackled a few times in this touch American football thing. We then come back, shower, we all sit around, have this massive turkey. Everyone holds hands, gives thanks for everything, including Adam's family and him being away from them. And I think that had a huge impact on him. He sent Chuck's wife Amanda and my wife flowers afterwards and said thank you for understanding. And we've kind of been friends, although I hardly ever see him because he doesn't come to meetings like the Academy. We've been good friends since, and I think you make bonds that way. Anyway, so of course when Pete Bates' fellowship in Carolina fell through, and he said to me, "Oh, Prim," I won't tell you, this is after he finally listened to me and went to America. He spent a year in New Zealand doing great AO trauma.
Yeah.
But I said to him, "You've either got to do pelvis and acetabulum or you've got to do frames. Otherwise, you're just a good trauma guy." But everyone thinks they can do AO trauma. So he said, "It's fallen through." I said, I'll call Adam." So I called Adam and I said, "I've got this guy. There's some stories in the past, but actually he's a good guy."
We've touched on some of those stories.
And Adam said, "Yeah, I'll pull my fellowship from the OTA and give it to this guy, Pete." And the rest is history. He thinks Pete's one of, not maybe the best, but one of the best fellows he's had, and they wrote a book together, and
I think I was the best visiting fellow he'd ever had.
Oh, yeah. No, in fact, he still mentions that. No, so I finished my fellowship in New York for 6 months in trauma, and then Keith Tucker sent me to the Gold Coast in Australia to work with a guy called Ray Randall. Ray's just one of the greatest minds. Ray again had come to do a fellowship in Norwich. He used to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to ride horses. He's mad about riding horses.
Kiwi?
No, Australian.
Sorry.
Yeah, and also played professional rugby league. But real brain. So I did 6 months of arthroplasty with him. But also his younger colleague, David Liu, who I'd worked with when I was in Norwich. He was the Commonwealth Fellow. We ended up doing the sports stuff together. And David is still working at the Gold Coast. Ray's retired. So those were my 2 fellowships. So I did arthroplasty and sports in Australia and trauma in New York.
So back in the day, Norwich was like the centre of the known orthopaedic universe, by the sounds of it.
Well, so you say that. Hugh Phillips is one of my huge... You talk about, me mentoring people. He was a huge inspiration, him and Tom Bucknell, to me. If I don't say Tim Briggs, Tim always comes... He'll phone me up this evening whenever this goes out. Paul Calvert, Martin Bircher, these are all people who influenced me on my journey through, but certainly Hugh Phillips was inspirational in terms of what he taught me, and he was a guy who always thought on that scale, and for me made Norwich a huge part, with the support of Keith Tucker and Malcolm Glasgow, there's no question. So
I tell you what, I'm going to change that. I'm going to freestyle a bit because I do fire in the booth. I freestyle the truth. I do jump around. We are going to talk about fellowships.
Yeah.
But I'm really intrigued. One thing you and I have spoken about in the past has been choosing a mentor. Can we talk about that?
Sure. It's the hardest thing you can do. is choosing a mentor.
And the other thing I've found is that your mentors change with different stages of your life and different stages of your career, potentially. It's not always the same person.
You know why? Because most people aren't trained to be mentors. And so they're able to give you really good advice at one point, but they're not evaluating their role as a mentor. It's almost innocuous in that they were giving good advice. And that's almost one of the downsides for me, is that in medicine generally, everyone gives advice. You know, you're never going to go to someone who says, oh, I'm shit at that, go and ask Cash. Right? They all want to give advice, and it is genuinely well intended. But the critical question you're asking yourself at the back of your mind is, who was this guy advised before, and where have they got to? This girl, you know, whoever it is, where have they got to? Who are the people that they have mentored who are success stories? Because as that repertoire grows, you start getting more and more people coming to you. And if you're clever, your ability to pick the people to mentor is equally important in terms of reward. And this is one of those tricky things as a TPD, because as a TPD, you don't really get to choose anymore with national selection.
No,
and so you mentor all your trainees.
Yeah.
But the most rewarding are the trainees who are going to outperform you. You see them grow, you see them perform, you see them stand on the world stage. I mean, you know, I look at guys like Pete. I'm not taking any credit for where he's got to, or Livio, or you, or Manoj, all these guys that I've kind of played a part in their growth. And it's hugely... It fills you with pride.
You didn't mention Josh Lee.
Oh no, Josh Lee, of course.
Just reminding you.
I mean, I could go through the whole list, right, and just leave out... No, I'm not going to leave out anyone.
So one thing you're talking about there is just a track record and how past performance is a predictor of future performance.
Usually as a mentor.
Yes.
Right? And what makes a mentor different to an advisor or a coach is a mentor has an emotional investment in the people that he's menteeing or she's menteeing. And that's a big deal. It's really hard to invest yourself in other people and live through their failures. We all do it with our kids. You know, my son didn't get picked for a football team and he's gutted and I have to pick him up. But I feel that because I've watched him train and I think, you know, he has this skill set. He would be able to contribute to the team. It's the same thing with each person that you're mentoring. You know, if they have a setback, something happens, it could be a life event, it could be something in their clinical practice, something goes wrong, some challenge, some healthcare scare, some, you know, family issue. Whatever it is, you live through that with them, and that is emotionally draining. So you've got to kind of limit the number of people you take on. But once you get that reputation and you can pick and choose, it's really rewarding.
What do you think about the approach of finding someone who is where you want to be now? And asking
and then dumping them.
No.
See that,
and then finding out what it took to get to where they are, and as a way of.
So those people can give you really good advice about their route they took. For me, it's a bit like you know, going to the top of Everest. Somebody who's been to the top of Everest, you say, what route did you take? And you could look up that route, and on a given day, that could be the best route. But for you, it may not be the right route, right? And timing plays such a key part in this. I mean, we've all seen it with contemporaries of ours where the stars aligned, some job appeared. You know, we've all know about consultant interviews where suddenly the chief exec said, why didn't we appoint both of them? You know, and boom, they got the job. And if you're praying for that route into a job, you're screwed, right? So I think all you can do is take advice about how people got there, apply it to you. And the more you know yourself, I think you've promised me three podcasts for the contract we signed. So, so one of them was around leadership. But this is one of the things in the leadership pursuit is understanding yourself, right? Finding truly what makes you tick, what drives you, where you're going to go. And it's the same in your path. You can talk to people, but the path that you take, in the end, you will have to determine. And I don't think a good mentor wouldn't tell you, follow this path. They would literally, nor would a good mentor give the same checklist to everyone and say, do this, do this. They would look at you, they would assess your strengths. They would say, you know what, why don't you think about doing this?
So just to establish a baseline, if you had to choose a mentor, Mr. Miyagi or Yoda?
So you've picked two people who are not, you know what both of them have in common is they never explained what they were doing. They kind of set tasks. You know, do this, you must. Or paint, wax on, wax off. And the whole time, and the whole time you're kind of like, why? So I don't like either of those styles. I'm literally like, listen, I think if you do this, this is the skill set this will bring this out in you. And I think, I'm not saying that's a weakness, but that's an area you could grow. Why don't you try that? That's my approach. Of the two, however, probably Yoda. He just lived for longer.
A lot more life experience.
Yeah, on different planets.
And Mr Miyagi had a lot of personal history in Okinawa. So
but having said that, bonsai, I mean, it's one of the things on my list. I told you I got my grade 1 piano.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so, you know, bonsai is there on the list, my never-ending list of things to learn.
One of my favourite mentors is, who's really useless, is in Mystery Men. Have you seen Mystery Men with Ben Stiller? There's a guy called the Sphinx. Okay. And he basically says, he who asks questions about training only trains himself in asking questions.
Oh, okay.
Quite deep.
That is quite heavy.
So listen, let's talk about fellowships.
Okay.
Transition.
So, what makes a great fellowship? Question I'm often asked before people go, whether it's home or away. And I have 5 things. So I always say in a Vive answer, never say 5 things because you'll forget the last.
Yeah.
So there are only 4 things. That's why I've said 5. Just remind me. The first thing is a brand. And that brand can be a surgeon that you're going to see. I'm going to do my fellowship with Cash Akhtar. Everyone goes, ooh, Cash Akhtar. Or it can be, or it can be a hospital. I'm going to HSS, I'm going to the Royal London, I'm going to Wrightington. I'm not going to say Nottingham because Ben Oliver might listen. Yeah. Right, so the brand is quite an important thing because it goes down on your CV and it goes chunk.
And you're associated with that brand.
Yeah, and the paediatric, you know, CHOP or whatever, one of those big sick kids in Toronto. These are just big, right? You brand associate immediately, right?
And there are certain big name fellowships. We don't need to name, but it's, you know, X and Y fellowship.
Right. But those, I mean, that's a classic I might come to talk about, which is fellowships that sit on their laurels and actually now are a name, but actually have lost a bit of their worth. Some of the guys won't like me talking about it, but I've got to say it, right? The second thing is volume. If you can go there and do 400 cases, 2,000 cases, whatever, you are going to get the experience that is going to just help you for the rest of your life. And volume of cases is something that people have started to struggle as consultant supervision and what you're allowed to do and litigation has come up. So going to one of the big volume fellowships certainly is of value. The next thing is a new technique. So if you can learn something that is either emerging or doesn't exist in your training program. I remember when hip arthroscopy started to come up, everyone's like, how do you do this? I mean, if I was a trainee then, I'd go and see Brian Kelly, I'd go and see Mark Philippon, I'd go and see one of these big name guys because that's who I want to learn from. But once you're a consultant, you miss that bit.
And anterior hips, for instance, was a big vogue a few years ago.
Right. And so learning a new technique, I think, is a hugely helpful thing to do. And the last thing is, where is your CV weak? Say it's publication, no, there's 4.
Okay.
I've got brand, volume, new technique, science, and then the 5th one is the one that I'm leaving out.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're light on publications, if you're light on management stuff, innovation now, digital health, all these new things, then you can identify somewhere that is, you know, go to Stanford. If your innovation, artificial intelligence, digital health is your thing, that would be the place to go. However, if you wanted publications, you go to Parvizi at the Rothman. And so the Dream Fellowship ticks all of those, all of the above. On top of that, you do want to have some fun, right? So going somewhere where either the department has a reputation or the city has a reputation for being a bit fun does help.
Oxford,
I think. Actually, no, you know. We had some tense cricket games when I was a trainee at Stanmore, representing them against the Oxford guys. Right. Some hard feelings, I think, but actually in the end, honours were even. I think credit. You know, I enjoyed playing against those guys. Next thing is network. You go on fellowship and you can build a network. And people always go under the misapprehension, to my mind, that you go there and you become friends with Jay Parvizi or Alan Gross or Don Garbus. The reality is those guys have friends, right? They're not looking to they don't need your friendship. And even if you work your nuts off for them, it's going to be a civil friendship. The friends you make are the chief residents, the other fellows. Those are the guys. And if it's a good program, those guys are going to become great in their own name. But you will go through experiences and friendships and those for me are the network connections that 10 years down the line, when you make a phone call and say, hey, I've got this guy, I've got this girl, she's amazing, you've got to give her the fellowship, they will do stuff for you.
And the thing that's interesting is when I did my Churchill, the guys who were the chief residents at the time, with Brian Kelly, with some of the other places, are now pretty senior guys running fellowship programs now, in Houston, in Philippon Institute. And so you're right, that's the network that you create, which is your peers, as it were, then you becoming
correct,
best mates.
And you have special times with them, and it makes a huge difference for me. You talk about the Churchill. I did the Hip Society Travelling Fellowship in 2009, and then the ABC Travelling Fellowship in 2014. And by then, not only was I making new friendships, but often I was sealing in stone old friendships where they thought, God, not only is this a great guy, but now he's clinically got the respect that I can be seen in public with him rather than in some dodgy bar late at night. I
remember you making a phone call for me to go to HSS.
Yeah.
And the fact is, that's a big call for you, because if I'm a complete idiot, that reflects quite badly on you, and that could affect a relationship potentially.
Yeah.
If you vouch for me.
Well, that's it. So you have a stock value. And as your stock value grows, as you make good recommendations, so I recommend Pete Bates to Adam Starr. Adam Starr thinks I've got a good recommendation. I've got to keep that in the bank. I send him one duff guy, I lose ground. And if the first guy you send is a duff guy,
game over.
Game over. They'll never listen to you again. Once you've got 3 good guys, you can accept one duff guy.
Yeah.
Don't worry, you weren't the 4th.
I was in my head, I was working out where do I... Quick maths. But, 2 plus 2 is 4.
But no, I think it is important. Those relationships are important. And the last thing is, I think, collaborating.
This is your 5th thing?
No. Okay. I've done the 4 things of the fellowship, and the 5th thing was a blank.
Okay.
But now I'm talking about those friendships and that network. What that brings, I think, in terms of value is your true ability to collaborate. So now that we're starting, Mo Bandari, dear friend of mine,
great guy.
What a genius. If you talk about somebody who understands global collaboration, understands the power of big studies, he has totally sorted out. Put Mac Ortho on the map. He stepped down.
Has he?
Yeah, and he's an incredible painter. Apart from being a crazy mountain biker and this super cool guy.
I remember he destroyed Kalpesh.
on the mountain riding.
One of our young restaurants and destroyed him mountain riding.
Yeah, no. So
it's funny when you said what a genius. I thought we had to say what a G. Because I remember sitting next to him.
Oh, he's a rap. He's crazy about the rap.
His knowledge of rap music was encyclopedic. Honestly, it pushed me to my limit.
Really?
Yeah. But I held my own.
In the end. Yeah. Have you seen Hamilton?
I haven't seen Hamilton. I haven't seen Hamilton, and it hurts me. I'm desperate to see it.
Saw it on Friday. Amazing.
Good.
Yeah. In fact, I could see Mo Bandari doing a Hamilton number. That will be the Mo, if you're listening. Yeah, so that's kind of my take on fellowships. We touched on Churchill, ABC, Hip Society. So travelling fellowships are a slightly different breed to your fellowship. And I think it's important people understand what the value of that is. You get exposure on a different scale with some weight on your shoulders because you're representing a band of people.
AO, Knee Society, Hip Society, Basque,
whoever they are, that could be the BOA. These are big, strong brands. So there is a weight on your shoulder to perform, not just socially, which is, I find easy, as you know, but clinically, but clinically, in terms of asking the right questions, showing the depth of knowledge. And I think those are phenomenal opportunities, but they're opportunities for your entire department. And I think people don't realise that the benefit for you as an individual is actually much slimmer. Back at the ranch, it doesn't go down well. Oh, honey, I'm going away for 5 weeks. I'll be drinking fine wine every night.
And to your department, I'm off for 3 weeks.
And so the ABC is just a bad word in my house. Still, this podcast won't get played.
6 years on.
It will never go away. Mind you, she's still incredibly charming when any of the ABCs visit us or any of my touring partners.
I thought you've had so much other bad behaviour that, to be honest with you, that would have paled into insignificance by now.
I don't know what you're talking about, Cash.
I plead the 5th.
Yeah, exactly.
One question I want to ask you.
Yeah.
One thing that trainees often ask me, something that plagued me at the time was, is it better to go overseas for a fellowship?
So you have to, this is another thing we could do a podcast on, which is your interview panel.
No, we got contracts for 3.
Contracts for 3, but I can renegotiate after that, right? A bit like the Liverpool team. Once you've, what was the question again?
Should you stay?
Overseas.
Should I go overseas?
Yeah.
Overseas looks glamorous.
So you go to an interview panel, and what makes up that interview panel? when you think about it and you go around systematically, is in the end there are only likely to be 3 orthopaedic surgeons there, right?
2 or 3 really, yeah.
Right. And for the other people sitting at the panel, whether it's the lay chair, whether it's the chief exec, whether it's the Royal College rep, if they don't know your region, anything international just sounds glamorous, right? And it far outweighs the internal knowledge, the orthopedic surgeon. Now, if there is an orthopedic surgeon there who has insight, who's conducting the interview and wants everyone to get a fair shout, then they will, in the discussion, bring up the fact that, sure, this was in Australia, but actually it was all doing private practice and assisting, whereas this might be in Humberside or whatever, but actually it's hands, knee, all the way into the elbows, doing lots and lots of work. And so I think that's an important factor. If you can, nowadays a lot of people are doing too, if you can by any means push it, I would say try and do an overseas fellowship. If you can't, then do what you did, which is spend a little bit of time so you can at least have a few lines in your interview to say you've had exposure to big scale stuff, you've seen. The thing that gives a tinkling or an inkling to the panel is that you could bring some new innovation that currently doesn't exist in the UK, in whatever your subspecialist area is. And that is always an attraction because everyone has challenges. Everyone has challenges, and the fact that somebody has seen something different, it's a bit like Star Trek, you've gone to another planet and you're coming back with this information, Jean-Luc Picard or James Tiberius Kirk or one of these guys, and you come back, it just does lend a bit of credibility. So if you can put that, worst case scenario, it's an AO fellowship for 6 weeks, but you show that you've got that global view, I think it adds something.
Because when you go overseas, it sounds glamorous. Australia, Canada, you don't necessarily know what experience they're getting. So I say to my trainees, if you can speak to a fellow who's there, who's been there, that makes a huge difference. And some of them come back and said, actually, this fellowship has changed. It's now a lot more assisting, and you're doing hardly any operating.
Well, see, this is exactly the point, right? So what used to be a great fellowship, Pete Myers in Brisbane or Leo Pinchevsky in Sydney, by the time you do the paperwork and 3 years down the line, these are all units that face, the arthroplasty fellowship in Vancouver is a classic example. They all have their own pressures. They all have to modify, use their funding as best they can. They might expand as consultants. They might expand the tier of fellows. Suddenly the job is diluted. There used to be 2 fellows, there are 5 fellows. Suddenly some legal case means that the consultant has to do every case. And so although you were getting a lot of exposure and doing 3/4 of the surgery, now you're just opening and closing. All this stuff is dynamic. And you can never have a total grip on it. But I would still say, if you're well trained in the UK, you're pretty much a good surgeon, and there's still a lot to learn. So the right person can get a lot of good stuff out of just observing. You can go in there and observe how the theatre's set up. You can speak to them over a pint and say, how did you get the money for the research program? Or how did you manage to retain, how do you manage to retain your nursing staff in New York City? We've got that problem in London. So there's a lot that you can learn as long as you look to learn that. If you suddenly go there and you think, oh, I'm not going to ask any of these questions, I'm just going to observe and think that I can learn how to do hip arthroscopy like Brian Kelly, that ain't going to happen.
By osmosis.
Right. And the other thing is, limit your time accordingly. If you go there and it's not delivering what it said on the tin, you have got to call it, right? And the thing is, if you have good referees and good mentors, they will call these people up and say, hey, buddy, this is not what our guy signed up for. I've advised him to pull it. I accept that you may not take my guys again, but you should have given us a heads up. Good fellowships, they can't rest on their laurels. They have to keep delivering for the current incumbent fellows. And equally, the fellows have to deliver for them. When fellows go over to a fellowship that has always churned out 10, 12 publications, academy presentations, and then you have a batch who just do nothing, then they're letting that fellowship down.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
Absolutely. Isn't everything, except a one-way street.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure. What can possibly go wrong? I'll see you next Tuesday.
Cheers, Cash.